In 2015, her father died suddenly. Then her husband started having health concerns, including high blood pressure and cholesterol, which led to a recommendation for statins. She had previously consumed meat extensively, including dishes like pickled Pete's feet, pork sausages, tripe, liver, oxtails, and even foie gras, if I'm saying that correctly, reflecting a long-standing tradition of eating animal products from her family's cultural background. What happened next would change the trajectory of her life. Welcome to episode 11 of the Vegan Body Lab podcast. I'm your co-host, Gabriel, and today I'm talking with Michele Olender, a certified life coach and fellow podcaster who went through a life-changing experience at age 56. And today's episode is a mind-shifting episode, especially if you're above the age of 40 and a career-driven human. It's great to have you on the show, Michele. How are you?
I'm great, Gabriel. Thank you so much for the invitation to be on your podcast. I'm very excited. I'm very flattered.
Absolutely. Well, it's definitely been one that we've been looking forward to having you on. And you've certainly had a story of health and physical, mental transformation, not just at the age of 56, but over different periods of your life. I think one thing that also stood out to me was your kind of like career transition. Also, I think you had a 20-year journey in corporate, and that also shifted for you as well. And then you had your big shift in your mid 50s as well. So multiple shifts that were happening over the course of your life over the past, 20-ish years or so.
Yeah, I think I didn't work in corporate, but my husband and I began our own advertising agency when we were young, very young, straight out of college, right on our kitchen table. So, and we still have that. We still have that business, but that is where I basically worked forever. And after going vegan and after, what I find is when you change something in your life, there are cascading, sometimes benefits, but cascading issues. You start to see what else might be possible. And working with people in this area of moving in a vegan or plant-based direction, I see that every single day. What I found, you step forward into one adventure, and then the road shifts in front of you, so suddenly you see yourself hopefully going in a direction that's more you and less what the world set up for you.
Understood. And it's kind of, well, it requires a certain kind of mindset for that, to be able to pivot and to adapt, because, and we were just talking about this right before the show, is it's interesting how some people are able to adapt and, be open to change, so to speak, and some of us just aren't. It's just not as easy.
Well, I think I for sure, one of the reasons I think I have my podcast, why I think I speak to a lot of people and why I'm a decent coach in my area is I never, ever, ever, ever expected to be vegan. I never thought about it. If I had thought about it, it would be like, well, that would be lovely. But impossible. Just never, it never would have occurred to me. And so many years ago, my daughter was moving in a vegan direction. And so I just started kind of supporting her, trying to looking for ways to make sure that she was making decent decisions for her health and her nutrition. And also trying to basically say, if I went to a restaurant with her, knowing how uncomfortable she felt asking for vegan options. And so I kind of started practicing that for myself in the long run, but at the time it was only for her. It was like, well, of course you must have something you can make her. So I kind of learned, and I learned on the job as a mom before I decided to kind of make that big shift for myself. And as you mentioned about my husband, my dad did die in 2015 kind of suddenly, and I had not been a huge fan of the amount of animal products he had been eating for his health. And then my husband wasn't in dire straits, but he was moving in that direction of statins and blood pressure and, what do we do next? And it just made me say, let's just do this. And I didn't make him, but I encouraged him to be vegan all day long. At one point, I think there was Mark Bittman had a book called Vegan Till 6 or V Till 6. And I said, why don't you just do that at dinner? You choose whatever you want at dinner, but make a big effort to kind of change your daytime consumption of animal products. and we'll learn how to, find things that make you feel satisfied with food and not trying to punish you. And then if it makes no difference, okay, we don't worry about it anymore after about eight
Sure.
weeks or whatever. But it did make a difference. So he has continued to be vegan till dinner. He mostly still eats he'll still eat fish at night. He
Mhm.
basically, other than that, doesn't eat any animal products. But I just stayed committed.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So, and from what you're sharing, I mean, 2015 was definitely a pivotal year for you. Obviously with your father, and obviously with the some of the health concerns from your husband. But was there, besides your daughter, was there any kind of like other initial spark to potentially even consider the plant based or the vegan route for eating?
I think out of my concern for my daughter, I started watching all the great documentaries, and I couldn't tell you which one. Probably What the Health or Forks Over Knives is probably around contemporaneous with that period of time. And so I started listening. I think, as I just mentioned to you earlier, I started listening to a lot of, because my daughter was a squash player. She was very active.
Mhm.
And so I started listening to vegan athletes, and there
Mm.
were quite a few of them with podcasts on at that time. Some of them have gone off the air, but I listened to a bunch of them. And I think over time it worked on me more than anybody. I was thinking, oh, well, if these young or middle-aged men can be ultra endurance athletes, I guess a suburban lady who just like walks, can probably figure out how to get enough protein and micronutrients. So 2015 probably is a year I hear frequently. That, and also the COVID period of time is a
Right.
timing that I hear frequently. People started leaning into this lifestyle.
It makes sense. Yeah, obviously having a little bit more time for introspection and, just self-reflection in general. I think those were some of the advantage I think that those periods rendered, so
Yeah.
to speak. And obviously you grew up from a kind of like a specific cultural background. We're talking about kind of like some of your Polish roots, and you ate a certain way, obviously before you became plant-based. I mean, how did you find the shift to, eating fully plant-based, fully vegan? Like how was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because my mom was a nurse. My dad was a physician. My mom was a nurse. My mom was a Yankee, grew up on a farm with cows. My mother believed deep into her soul that milk was the perfect food. She just
Mm.
absolutely believed that. And a couple times, my pediatrician as a kid had told her, I think Michelle's kind of lactose intolerant. My mother was like, "That is such nonsense." Well, I am. I really had a hard time. I really had a hard time. Maybe not as lactose intolerant as many people, but I am.
Sure.
But my my mother's family also would eat. The Yankees would eat meat all the time. Fish from the local rivers
Hmm.
frequently, but pickled pig's feet is the one that always makes people laugh because you used to be able to buy it in the jar at the supermarket in New England, and I think that would just revolt most people to think about, but it was something I used to have with my mom or my grandfather frequently with
Sure.
crackers.
Yeah, yeah, no, makes sense. Yeah, I remember growing up in Pennsylvania in the Poconos, and every now and then we would have liver, and it was kind of like not my most like it wasn't a meal that I look forward to the most, but it was an acquired taste. And again, that was the background that we grew up in. That was a lifestyle. That was the food presentation. And I think that's if all that you know is a certain color, then that's all that you're gonna know.
Absolutely. No, and um, it's not to demonize anybody for the decisions they were making. I mean, this is what was reasonable, and this is what people learned, and this is what people were indoctrinated in for good reasons, as well as maybe not such good reasons. But there were nowhere near as many choices, and there were nowhere near as many reasons scientifically, or I think understanding how animals actually get to our supermarkets. They once maybe had slightly different lives before they got to our tables, but now overwhelmingly they're coming from kind of completely unsupportable practices.
Absolutely. And I think something that you just highlighted there, which is important, is the education on it, on this specific topic, because I mean, it wasn't really prevalent, for, I would say, until the past few decades. I think probably until Campbell. I think you're familiar with
Hmm.
Campbell. I think you have a certification from him as
Hmm.
well. Until Campbell really started presenting this. And the ironic part, Campbell came from a small dairy farm himself. So I mean, talk about the amount of kind of like reconditioning, re-education he had to
Sure.
go through. Ethics aside, because ethics is an important thing, but just on the health side, I mean, there wasn't that much information available. And I think that, well, it's interesting with your husband's health. So you guys started doing the vegan, or like eat till dinner, vegan, kind of
Yeah,
like the
he
whole
was
day.
vegan till dinner, and I was at that point. I always say I was a excusitarian before for a few years. I was vegan unless it was like a problem in some way. If I was at
Sure.
somebody's house, or if I was traveling, so I was a very kind of like, yeah, well, I'd prefer to be vegan right now, but I can't figure out how to make it happen. I don't want to
Sure.
embarrass myself. I don't want to embarrass somebody else, and so at the time that he went vegan till 6, I decided, you know what, I'm going to figure out how to be vegan all the time.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I think you touched on this already, but just real quick. So your husband's health since you guys implemented that protocol, I mean, how's his health been
So
since
his
those many
cholesterol
years?
went down, and he now he's 67, and I don't believe that necessarily it's a panacea for all things, but
Mhm.
he did not have to go on statins as early as that. His blood pressure is better than it was. His cholesterol is better than it was, and it's just we're still going to be old. We're still going to be we're still going to face issues. I just this year, it's bad for my brand, I always say, but this year I had a thyroid ablation and I had a cardiac ablation, not because of being vegan. It's just at
Mhm.
certain points, certain things happen. Most of that had happened long before I went vegan. I had a thyroid issue that began after my first child was born in 1990. My third child was born in 1993. And so it was something we punted down the road and finally had to deal with
Mhm.
this year. So, and I've never had a physician, as much as we give our physicians sometimes a hard time for not being supportive to vegans,
Mhm.
none of my physicians have ever encouraged me to not be vegan. They've all
Mhm.
been very supportive of it and have said, keep doing what you're doing. So it's not one thing or another. And I never really talk about a lot of health on my podcast from my own point of view, but it is one of the strategies that we can use to avoid a bunch of lifestyle diseases. Is whole food, plant based, not a Diet Coke and French fries veganism.
Makes sense. And, I acknowledge the level of transparency that you're sharing, because it's not something, especially like you said, it's probably not so brand friendly. It's probably not going to be so helpful to, acquiring new customers. But at the same time, I deeply resonate with that level of honesty because it's not so frequently shared. I mean, in the industry that I work in the fitness industry, there are many things that are done in the name of fitness that are not actually very healthy, including getting down to, 5-6% body fat. That is actually not a very healthy place to live for, multiple weeks or months at a period, yet that kind of imagery is promoted to us at all angles, from
Mm.
bodybuilding magazines, to bikini competitors, to Instagram models, that's actually not a health based way of living. And yet that was my way of living for a long period of time,
Mm.
for, wanting to be ripped and having a 6 pack, 8 pack, 365 days a year. It took me, that point when I got off stage in 2021 and in the best shape of my life, the leanest I'd ever been, 5% body fat. I was a vegan physique competitor. I was like, yes, I'm a living symbol of fitness. I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. And I felt at my lowest point in my health
Mm.
because the chronic autoimmune disease that had plagued my body since 10 years old had really started to flare up at that point, where it had been mainly delegated and hidden behind my scalp and, a little bit on my joints, had started flaring up all through the top of my upper back, the lower back, started coming out on my legs. And I was like, this doesn't feel right. Like there's something off here. Yes, I'm in great shape, but I actually don't feel like I'm in great health. And I think that's, to your point, we 100% can be vegan and, just eat junk food, and not quote unquote be healthy. And on the other side, you could be completely whole food plant based and maybe struggle with building muscle or dropping weight. So it's kind of like, so where's the bridge, right?
Yeah,
Where's the
it's
bridge
not.
where you,
We're way more complicated, right? We're way more
yes.
complicated. There's way more going on in terms of our sleep and our family systems and the stress we're under and the toxins we're exposed to. I mean, there's so many things going on with and so one of the things I always do push back with vegans. I mean, it's not a panacea. It's not one thing. Especially, I think when you're young, in your 20s and 30s, you can start to think things are a little bit more simple. I think when you get into your 40s, 50s, 60s, and you've raised other young beings and kept them alive, you start to see, there's some luck and there's some genetics and there's some,
Mhm.
practical distinctions we have to make. And yeah, you transform your health the best way you can. And a vegan or plant-based diet is it's a separate category. It's not
Mhm.
one. It's not the identical category.
Right, right. It's multifactorial, like you're suggesting. We have the environment, we have health, we have nutrition, we have, a social life, relationships, spiritual, mental, like it's all incorporated. Something you mentioned, I think you said it was after your third child, that's where you started noticing kind of like some of the thyroid imbalances and challenges. From traditional Chinese medicine, from TCM, they talk a lot about kind of like the impact of, childbearing. It's an incredibly kind of like life taxing activity. It literally, like, you are giving part of your life force, the egg, right,
Mm.
to produce a new human being. So it's no wonder, so many women who especially have multiple children, it's like, shoot, like they've gone through the ringer, like if anybody who's gone through childbirth, it's like it's one hell of a task, and not a small one, to say the least. But coming back to your first year, so your first year being plant-based, being vegan, what was that like for you? What were, I guess, some of the experiences that you went through?
Okay, well, I think one of the things that was interesting for me at the time was I had been used to eating quite carefully, small-ish, kind of high protein-ish meals with like, a protein of meat. I did eat lots of legumes and stuff previously also. I ate lots of vegetables previously also. But I had more of a kind of a tiny plate. I had to eat a lot more food when I went vegan, completely vegan. I had to eat a lot more food than seemed normal to me at first. And that's partially being, I think, socialized as a middle-aged woman that, you have to eat carefully and your chicken breast takes up 30% of the plate. And then you very few starches and lots of broccoli or brown rice or whatever. I don't know. So anyway, I found that I was uncomfortably hungry at first until I really got comfortable
Mhm.
eating what needed to be eaten. And so that is where I think, and I see with my clients all the time, people can feel depleted. They can feel like unsatisfied. They can feel a little bit weak because
Mhm.
often they're not eating enough food if they've transitioned from that way of eating with a lot of protein from an animal or cheese on the plate.
Makes
So
sense.
that took a while for me to kind of get comfortable with a big heaping plate, and that's why I started on Instagram at one point. I started to show my meals because I wanted people to see I'm eating a heaping amount of food. This is not
Mhm.
restriction, and
Mhm.
it doesn't look like the way I ate previously.
In terms of kind of like the contrast from what
The
you're sharing.
volume of it, really,
Right.
the amount of it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I mean, it is a significant contrast, especially if you're going from kind of like more of a standard American diet or more of like a heavily processed, animal-based diet to now it's like you're whole food plant-based and it's like, holy crap, like I can eat this much food. It's like
Yeah.
incredible,
I had thought of myself as a whole food eater, but the whole foods included animal products. So I think in my case, it was a little bit easier because I did love vegetables. I did really eat lots of vegetables. I was like, when they talk about meat and potatoes, we were like
Mhm.
meat and five veg. We would always have tons of vegetables with meat. And that made it easier for me because I think some people who do not eat a lot of vegetables will find it a little bit of a slower go. And that's why I always say veg your best in terms of my podcast, but also in terms of my message. This is such an important distinction to try to limit or eliminate the consumption of animal products. There's so many good reasons for it. Don't make perfection be the enemy of learning how, because there is a learning curve. There really is a learning curve. And enough people just do it overnight that we can think, oh, that's how you do it. You do it overnight. But not everybody does.
Makes sense. Yeah. And I think it's like with all things in life, there's some people or some of us, it's kind of like we can do cold turkey, and for some of us, it's kind of like, well, this is going to take a little bit of practice and, I'm going to fail a lot of times and failure's feedback, that's how we learn all
That's
things.
right.
But I think to piggyback off your point, I think that it's something that, and I mean, we can be honest about this. We've both been vegan, plant-based for quite a while. So I think it's something that does come up frequently, especially in the vegan space where it's kind of like, vegans are known to be, more judgmental and a little bit more critical, at least a small segment of that particular social circle. And what I've heard and seen, especially on social media very often, is that if somebody's not 100% vegan, then, it doesn't matter. Right. It's like, even if they're like 99.99999%, it's like, oh, yeah, they're not vegan. It doesn't count. It's like, well, I think I probably would have agreed with that, several years ago when I also fell into that similar camp of being very righteous and, judgmental of myself and other people. But I think also now with time, I think it's interesting to see that, any effort actually is a positive effort, even if it's just getting, like vegan till dinner. I think that's phenomenal, right? Or even just adding more fruits and vegetables and reducing a little bit. And what I'm trying to share here is that I believe that the plant-based vegan movement can have a bigger impact than it currently is having if we help more people, move towards less of that perfection, more towards like, let's make some progress, and perfection will come with time, or we'll make the real progress in time. But it's like beating people up and beating ourselves up too, because a lot of that stuff is happening internally. I think that's where some of the biggest changes can happen, at least in this field.
To my point of view, what stands in the way of more people being vegan is that they just don't believe that they could make it work. And the way you learn to believe in yourself is to lean into it, and not because I couldn't have done it overnight the first time I thought of it. It just wouldn't have happened. And we lose too many people because they interpret having trouble in certain situations or in certain health issues or having trouble in certain social worlds, or they live in certain parts of the world where it's just much, much harder for them. And they don't prepare their own foods because they're in whatever situation. Why lose those people making a difference and moving in that direction because we judge their result? And the result is, who knows what the result is in the long run. I can probably do better in other areas of my life, but I have a pretty, I would say, 100% vegan consumption for food, but I take a medication now for my thyroid, and I have decided not to worry about whether that is vegan or not. I'm sure it began with an animal testing. And so I can't stand in judgment of anybody. And the vegan society, even the most kind of, purist point of view, is we avoid the cruelty and consumption of animals to all possible and practicable points. At some point, it's not possible or practicable. And hopefully we can learn how to make that better as we move along.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a collective effort. And the more that, more people, the general public, ourselves included, like everybody just understands like this is a team effort. This has to happen on an individual level as we're working on individually, but also collectively, as a group, like from our own local communities to the state level, then to bigger and bigger levels. And I listened to an interview. You mentioned something along the lines like dietary change is simple, like to eating plant-based, but like some of the psychological changes, like self-doubt, rationalization, identity shifts, like these are more complex. I mean, could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, of course, the food is a really small part of why we eat. We eat to be with other people. We eat to travel or to experience. We are lucky enough, most people that are listening to this podcast, people eat for entertainment. They eat for fellowship. And so there is and they eat because they have grown up with what Dr. Melanie Joy calls that animal products are necessary, normal, natural, and nice. And so we've been indoctrinated in that, not for evil reasons necessarily, but because we hold that deep in our hearts. It makes any kind of change about food kind of trigger us a little bit, like, oh, maybe that's not really natural. Oh, maybe, if eating pea protein or something like that, or eating tofu, people are like, oh, maybe that's processed. So, and then it's hard to argue with that, like, oh, well, I guess it is a little bit processed. I mean, it is. So we start to overthink our reasons, and you can start to get exhausted by that because the process of change can be tiring. Now, of course, most of the animals that are raised are fed non-organic, all kinds of processed foods and non-organic soy and things that other people are warning us about eating. And most human consumption tofu is organic, and important to eat organic tofu and soy products, in my opinion. I'm not a nutritionist, so do your own research. But I think that's an important thing to pay attention to. So food is just much more complicated than the nutrition, than the macronutrients or the micronutrients. It is about how we show up in this world, our convenience factor, our sense of satiety, and whether we feel like we've been loved or we deserve something at the end of the day, something sweet or whatever. So much goes into it. And I have small grandchildren now, and I see how food represents an outsized part of their day, part of their fun is food, sitting down and having it made and enjoying it or making it with mom or I'm babcia, I'm grandmother, Polish grandmother.
Babcia,
I'm babcia.
of course.
And
and Dziadek, of course.
And Jajo, yeah, but in my case, Jajo, yeah, we are babcia and Jajo. My husband's also Polish. He's more, as he points out, he's more Polish than I am. Both his parents were born in Poland. Only my dad was born in Poland. So.
Okay. All right. So he's more of a pure blood.
Yeah, but I actually have Polish citizenship and he doesn't. So
so
we can play this game all day.
Wait, can I go in? And my wife is Polish.
Yeah, there you go. You can join. And so your son is half Polish then?
That's correct.
That's right.
Yeah, he's mixed. He's Polish, Latino. He's American. He's a human at the end of the day,
Yeah. Well, that is America,
That is true.
I hope it stays that way.
Yeah, agreed. And we both value coaching. So,
Yes.
we have this very similar kind of like background of coaching and wanting to support people. And it sounds like you had coaching specifically. If I read some of kind of like the articles and things about you in the past, like you had coaching to help you in your plant-based journey. Like
not in my plant-based journey, but I did go through coaching to start some other things. And I went and got my master's in my 50s in art history. And at that period in time, I was like trying to like kind of, challenge myself in a different way. My kids were all getting ready to go to college, and it wasn't empty nest, but it was like pre-empty nest. And I think it's important. If you think empty nest is coming, I think it's really good to start something very, very, very challenging.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But,
is there a specific reason for that?
Yeah, because, well, in my case, going to grad school was the best thing I ever did for my kids because I was much more positive about when they were not getting A's or maybe were not studying quite as much as I thought they should be studying or not quite applying themselves as much because I was in the middle of going to grad school and I was dropping the ball sometimes. I did a podcast not too long ago, but I love art history and I would have these once a week classes that I loved, literally loved, and was making a huge effort to go to, a pain to go to. And I would sometimes not do the work before I showed up at my once a week, because once a week was like, I've got plenty of time. Suddenly I'm on my way into the class and I haven't done all the work. So it gave me a lot of humility and a lot of just a lot more compassion for how hard it can be to organize things. Even when when you're doing your best, it's not always looking fabulous.
Right, right. Which is, again, it feeds into the coaching perspective, which
Yes.
is, there's going to be a lot of failures. There's going to be a lot of times where you fall down. And I'm sure you've seen this a lot with your own, like, one-on-one coaching practice. You've helped a lot of people in their own health. I believe is it also with career coaching as well?
Yes, I have a kind of a combination of clients. Some of them are vegan, like just naturally fine with their whole vegan outlook, and they like having a life coach who is also vegan. So sometimes they just want to support and just surround themselves with other vegans. Other people do want the help with changing something about their plant-based practice or their vegan practice, and very often they're people who want to restart. And I hear so often people come to me and say, "I was I was never happier than when I was plant-based or when I was vegan, and I just
Hmm.
couldn't keep it up." So that is something about it calls them back that they want that
Right.
again. But overwhelmingly, it's the social and the day-to-day lifestyle, not of the food, but of dealing with the people around the food. Whether they're thinking that maybe their family or their partner should be doing the same exact thing with them, and
Hmm.
then or saying, "Oh, when they're eating animal products, what difference does it make if I don't? I should just eat it." you know
Right,
and
right.
and you can start talking yourself into it, and which is fine if that is what you want to do. I never tell people what they nobody's going to get a lecture from me if I
Hmm.
work with them. They never get a lecture. I'm just going to ask them what they want to do and ask
Hmm.
them how they want to get there, and then help come up with tactics and a strategy to get them where they want to go.
Makes sense. It's like a personalized roadmap,
Yeah,
for them, because that's actually what coaching is about, is actually helping people understand what's the solution from within them. Because actually they actually know the best solution for
they
themselves,
do.
even though we may be able to, say like A, B, and C probably could be the best route, but maybe they want to go on route D, which is a little bit outside the box, but that could be actually the best route for them.
Yeah, I just tend to most of my clients I find them to be kind of a little more type A, a little bit more kind of perfectionistic, overthinkers, and we do ourselves a disservice. It's such a great these are great qualities, but they can also really get in our way when we think everything has to match. We can't do anything until we've done all the research. Just overcomplicating, and I'm just the permission slip that says we can just do it what works right now. We can just do that. Because I see time and time again, any big change helps with all the other changes. And if you are a busy person with a career or a family or any number of things people are busy with, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do boot camp with veganism or boot camp with fitness, right? We can just do push ups or squats, and that's
Sure.
way better than not doing anything. We don't have to
Correct.
necessarily have the whole workout done three times a week and rotating through the whole body. It would be great and it's a good thing and we want good advice about it, but it doesn't mean we wait until we can do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's especially with the audience, it seems like we work with a similar type of person with, perfectionists and,
Yeah.
high achievers and overthinkers. And at the same time, I do agree that these are potentially, I mean, these are great strengths that if you play into them can lead to phenomenal results. And at the same time, they can be very detrimental if you let them consume you, so to
Right.
speak. It's like, okay, everything's got to be perfect before I launch this new plan or I start my fitness or, I finally go back to trying to be, fully vegan again, and it's like, well, you already have the characteristic or the character trait, as I like to call it. You have the character trait that's made you very, very successful in your
Right.
career or in family life or in education. Why not just transfer it over to this area and then just release the reins a little bit, right? Because you go on at, 0 to 100 can work, for 3 months or maybe even 3 years, but is it going to last for 30 years? Is it going to last for the next 40, 50 years? If not, the one of my favorite rules is the 10-10-10 rule is, can I do this in 10 years, 10
Mm.
months, and 10 weeks? Most of us can answer the first two. A lot of us can't answer that last one. 10 years. That's like, most of us aren't even thinking in 10 years. We're thinking like 10 days, like 10-day sprint. I'm going to go really hard, or, I'm going to do this 30-day challenge, or, 75 hard, or all these boot camps and stuff. And I think, yes, it is helpful to have seasons where we do have seasons of intensity. I am for that. I'm going through a season of intensity for my health and for my healing, and I think it's appropriate knowing that this season of intensity may need to have a season of rest or rejuvenation after that. And I think it's helpful in business. That's why we have quarters, right? It's like, all right, this quarter I'm going to go really hard, and then I'm going to take the foot off the pedal a little bit the next quarter.
Absolutely, because it's a truism that we overestimate what we can accomplish in a week or 6 months, and we underestimate what being really, really, really imperfect for 6 months, 3 years, 5 years, we underestimate what that can accomplish. And we especially the people I work with are all middle-aged and older. We can't just put everything on hold to just do one thing. We have to still, pay taxes, pay the bills, keep kids and loved ones alive, and get the plumber in. We had electricians in the other day. It's not just one thing, and so we have to figure out how to make it all work. And when we have education in our culture is typically, people will say, "Oh, I could have learned what I learned, first through eighth grade. I could have learned, probably in 1 year."
Yeah.
Okay, true, but that is not how it works. It's just not how it
Sure.
works. Otherwise, people get dropped out of it. They get left behind if there's not a process that keeps people revisiting reading and writing and arithmetic, and socializing, and we value the consistency of staying in. And of course, sometimes some people can jump ahead if they are extremely coached, like by a medical coach, by a physical coach. You see kids suddenly become incredible athletes overnight or very, very quickly because they're being coached in that way. But most of us, we just need to stay on track, and we make amazing gains.
Yeah, it's a long-term game versus, the short-term mentality, so to speak. And yeah, I think it's very helpful. It's something I think over the past few years now, starting to invest financially, starting to invest into index funds and things that take, 10, 15, 20 years to really appreciate. It's like, wow, what was I doing 10 years ago when I was just like stock picking and just like, all right, this is going to be Tesla's going to go amazing. And then, a few years later, I sold it all, and it's like, shit, I should have held on to. It's like this such a short-term mentality. It's almost like indoctrinated into us. It's like, oh, like quick wins, or this kind of like dopamine rush of like get results overnight, or you get rich overnight, or drop 20 pounds and 5 weeks or something. It is addicting, and I think now with artificial intelligence and robots and all biotechnology and all these things, like the world is speeding up, and I think I spoke about this on a recent podcast. Most of us are now getting more enamored with robots and artificial intelligence, and yet we are leaving on the table the most powerful technology or the most powerful intelligence that we all have available to us, which is our natural intelligence. It's our innate, natural, inbuilt. It's like whatever your spiritual or mental or emotional beliefs are, like this is an incredible intelligence. Like we're the ones that actually built AI. Like, isn't that really cool? Just thinking about like we're the designers of it. And yeah, it's easy. I think it's easy for us to fall into these pitfalls, like you mentioned. Would you say like when you started to fully commit to being vegan, you started committing to this journey, what did you find surprising? Like once you were on the journey, being fully vegan, fully plant-based?
Well, my first reaction, I think a few things, but one thing I for sure have noticed and say, when I realized that I could actually be vegan, I started to realize, what else do I not think I can do that I actually can do? What else is possible? What else don't I know about the world? Like I didn't know about the food system as much as I do now. And what else don't I know about me and my own capabilities? And this is what I see so much when you make a big change of any kind. I'm sure you see it with fitness, with strength. People reinvent their belief in what they're capable of. And so many of us shut down that because we're like, oh, I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want to look like an idiot. I don't want to like be that girl that's suddenly, doing, there's certain things that seem okay. Like people will say, oh, middle-aged people can learn to run a marathon or something. That became kind of normal in my age in my age group, which
Yeah.
I think 30 years before people would be like, that is bizarre. Why would you ever do that? So I think, so I think we've learned, like, jogging was new basically in the 60s and 70s. That was kind of a new activity. I don't know
Gotcha.
if you're aware of how
Yeah.
unusual
I'm
jogging was
I'm just
back in that
thinking
period of
60s and
time.
70s. There was obviously we had a lot of the hippie movement and things like that. So I'm probably like, they're like, what are these people running from? What are they doing?
You're streaking. I think that was the big thing back in that period of time. That's how old I am. I go back to that level. But I don't feel that old. So that's a good thing. And I do credit that to being vegan. I really do think, and I don't know if it's just the choices, like feeling like somebody that made a choice and tried to learn how to grow into that choice. I think
Mhm.
that has made me feel kind of young and still ready to learn and try new things. And honestly, and one of the other things, being vegan gave me the rationale and the goal to start this podcast. I started that 2020. We're moving into 6 years now,
Wow.
280
Right.
podcasts,
Wow.
consecutive weekly podcasts, no repeats, no weeks off, consecutive 280 consecutive weekly. And I don't know if I've done anything else for 280 consecutive weeks. I mean, that kind of blows my mind. That's not who I think of myself as, being a consistent, organized person. Now, partially, I helped myself by putting some people in with me to keep me accountable. And so, when you asked about coaching, coaching allowed me to open up my self identity and my self belief that I could do something and not just go, oh, well, there's no way I can keep that up. I better not even start.
Mm.
And that's kind of who I am now. Is I kind of believe, oh, I can do things that I might have to go, "Ugh, that didn't work," and sign off, but
Mhm.
that's okay. There's no vegan police going to kick your door in and tell you started out wrong or you didn't do it correctly. There's there's also no police coming in to kick in your door to tell you shouldn't have started that new idea and you shouldn't be
Mhm.
writing that book, and okay, you're going to look embarrassed if you bring a vegan dish to the potluck. That we can do so much more than we think. We have so many rules that are so controlling and so, like, they shut us down. And you talk often about a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. We all have fixed mindsets in some
Mhm.
ways, I think. And it's
Mhm.
so kind of cool to meet yours once in a while and say,
Mhm.
well, why do I think that? Why do I think I can't do that? Why do I think I couldn't stand to be a little embarrassed or have
Mhm.
people make fun of me when I make that choice? Who
Mhm.
cares? I mean, I
Yeah.
do. I still care, but
Yeah.
maybe I can get through it once or twice or three times. And then you go, well, that's actually about them, not about me.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's such an important point, and I think that distinction that you just shared there with kind of releasing some of those like self-imposed limitations. We spend so much of our time um, making up stories, and kind of pretending. Like it's a very common concern I hear going, especially for people who haven't gone to the gym or worked out in a while in a gym. It's like, what are people going to think of me? Like how I'm working out, or am I going to look foolish, or things like that. And it's so interesting that 99.9% of people are all thinking the same thing when they walk in the gym. Even the people who look like they're really fit, they're like, oh, shoot, someone's looking at me. It's like, at the end of the day, it doesn't actually matter, what people think. And I think that's part of human development and,
Yes.
and growth is actually just releasing that. I think, and let me see, actually, I have one of my books here. I'll have to double check. But there's a interesting book. It's on the 9 developmental cycles of like human growth and development. And in one of them, I think it's cycle 3 or 4. It's a teenage year. One of those things is actually just releasing. Like you don't care what other people think of you. But most of us are still stuck in that kind of like teenage cycle of like, oh, I do care. That's like, status, right? That's why so much of us care. Like, 50s, 60s, 70s, we care so much about status and symbolism and, like, our place in society. And in reality, that's all things that don't really matter. And to your point with the fixed mindset, I think that without actually any kind of self-observation practice, like we never actually recognize like, oh wow, there's a part of me that's really like open to growing, and then there's a part of me that actually just wants to stay here and never change at all, and that's okay. But until we
Right.
address both sides of those, like we're pretty stuck.
Yeah, we just want to try to be a little bit curious, I think, about why we do certain things and why we're comfortable with certain things and why we're not. You know, one of the things you were just saying about people feeling judged at the gym. I always try when people are saying, "Oh, I'm going to be judged," or "Oh, they're going to make fun of me," or "Oh, they're going to say, "Oh, here she goes again with
Hmm.
her new idea or new thing," and I don't follow through. And I always say, "Who's somebody that does not care, that you kind of like? It could be fictional, it could be
Hmm.
historic, it could be like who's somebody you can think about." And I think it's so important. It would be different for everybody. I always, as a young person, I was asked this: who like is your on your board of directors, you know, like somebody you, and for me it was Queen Elizabeth the First of England. I was just like, I don't know for sure what she'd be like, but I'd be like, she sure doesn't care. Like she is, she's like, I'm telling you what to do. So there was something about that. I needed to give myself a little more permission to, like, she would show up the way she wanted to in my head. So I think
Hmm.
it's really important for people when they're feeling a little bit like, I'm not, that's not who I am. I don't feel like that. Is to kind of think about people we admire that do demonstrate that sort of behavior, that sort of take no prisoners, or
Hmm.
I mean, for my clients, typically that's where they're stuck. They're a little bit, uh, um, they don't want to be the high maintenance person, the one who's demanding, and they're
Hmm.
deciding that to say, is there meat in that vegetables in that vegetable soup? Is there meat
Hmm.
stock in there? That sounds like over asking, and that it's too
Hmm.
demanding. And so we always like think like, well, is there somebody that you know or can think of that would be able to just ask that question and not feel any kind of self-reproach about it? And then maybe we can just imitate them asking a certain question here and there. And it just makes us a little more comfortable and also start to make fun of ourselves a little bit like, who am I worried about? It's I'm going to ask, I'm asking to pay for this soup. I'm just asking what's in it. Is that
Right.
okay?
Right. I'm paying for the product.
Yeah, if they're not doing me a favor.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You were sharing that perspective there, and just what popped into my head there was modeling is the highest form of learning, whether that's fictional or imagination. Using characters in the past, or real life modeling. You have seven grandchildren. I'm not sure how many kids do you have?
I have three kids,
Three kids, I mean, that's just 10 people, not including spouses
right?
or, anybody else. That's 10 people. I'm just guessing right off the bat. Like, you have a pretty significant influence on. And having a lighthearted, kind of like more playful, non-judgmental, non-self-reproaching, just like, because people can sense that, like when we're judging ourselves and beating ourselves up, because it
Yes.
just comes out and it's like, wow, grandma's babcha, she's so laid back, she's very accepting, and wherever everybody's at in their journeys for health or career, relationship, whatever their path is, it certainly does help when you have a role model who embodies certain characteristics, because I think that's the heart of all of this, is that, again, at the individual, at the family levels where we make, some of the deepest change.
Well, you're reminding me of one of my prickly points. I often have heard, "Oh, well, what am I going to eat when I go to my grandmother's house? What's she?" And I am like, I am not going to be, as a grandmother, as a woman in her 60s and hopefully going into her hundreds. I do not want to be the excuse for why you don't do what you think is best. I mean, I I feel like that's such a like, how dare you make me some sort of reactionary, obviously they're not talking about me per se
Of
in this
course.
scenario, but I
Yeah.
feel like just like outraged on the behalf of all grannies out there, all babchas, all omas, all of us grandmamas in the world. It's like
Yeah.
okay, maybe we don't get it, whatever it is. I'm sure there'll be all kinds of things my grandkids are aware of that I won't be aware of when, when they become 30, 40, whatever. But I hope that they never think of me as an excuse for why they can't do something that's super important to them. And and maybe I won't always know how to support them the way, but I just, as a grandmother, that's my prickly feeling, is just like, no, we are not the reason why people can't go plant-based or vegan.
I like that. Yeah, and good reminder again. Like, I think. Well, I guess piggybacking to the next point here. I mean, your inspiration to help others in their health using plants. I mean, you have an ambitious goal. I think I read it on your website, if I read it correctly, that to help 1 million people improve their lives using plants. I mean, that's a
I
pretty
would love it. I
ambitious
would love
goal.
a million women to move in that direction who don't believe that they could. Yeah. I mean, that's just like my outsized goal.
Is there anything that's driving that specifically, like a deeper motivation?
I just think we all shut ourselves down from what we're capable of. And so
Mm,
maybe for some people, it's not moving in a plant-based direction, but they look at the works that you do or I do, and they think, oh, but there is something I could do. I personally think moving in a vegan direction is really important for lots and lots of reasons in our society, lots of reasons for community health and our family's health and for sustainability and for water usage and pollution. I mean, I see a lot of reasons that I think personally it's really important. I think there's other things that are really really important in the world, and I want everyone to be stepping forward to do it imperfectly and then
mm,
learning from what that is for them. So yes,
mm,
I want it is important to me that we don't give up the power we have in that second half of our lives or the
mm,
third of our lives. There's so
mm,
much that can be done. And I think young people need support more than I have ever noticed in the past. I feel like
mm,
young people need more support from the older ones in the community than they've ever needed. And I don't know if that comes out of the COVID situation. I don't know if it comes out of social media and AI. I don't know what specifically it is. I don't pretend to know, but I do know that I think we need to show up for young people and demonstrate that we're happy to get up in the morning and we're
mm,
excited to get up in the morning, even in our 60s, 70s, 80s. We're building. We're not
mm.
just sitting around consuming.
Right, right. And I mean, it comes back to that hierarchy of connection. I mean, that from my understanding, from most kind of like ancient tribes around the world, there was always that connection between like kind of like the elder or the eldest or the in many cases the matriarch, right, and all the way down to the youngest, and that does increasingly seem to not be as common,
Yeah.
and I think especially here in the States it's more kind of like disconnected, so to speak, and I think social media definitely doesn't aid with that. I think most media, channels, news, Netflix, all this is kind of like just creating bigger and bigger bridge where it's kind of like we have reality, which is like what we're all living in, like what is, and then there's kind of like this other like projected reality where it's like, people are now starting to live in kind of like this other like artificial reality or this like
Mm.
fake world. So, yeah, and I mean, how else are we able to pass down, the collective wisdom, from prior generations, from humans who walked through the same path as we did, made probably, 100 times more mistakes. How do we absorb that? I don't think any AI can replace that, so to speak, because of the lack of emotion, a lack of the human element, so to speak.
Yeah, no, we are in many ways, we have to concentrate on what makes life really amazing right now. And there are many things about life right now that are amazing. There are obviously a lot of challenges. From my point of view, right now, there's a lot of challenges in the United States. And, I think we need to all be involved. Everybody needs to be doing something. And not necessarily what I'm doing or what you're doing, but people need to do what they can bring to the table to support their own energy in the world and also to, support a couple other people along the way too. I mean, I have a built-in. I guess you were counting us up. There's probably like 15 of us when my kids and grandkids and spouses all together. So I have that crew, and I do want to be a model, not necessarily the details of what I do, but somebody who keeps learning and keeps trying and doesn't just shut down and go, well, I never did that before, so why would I do that now? I
Mhm.
want my kids to reinvent themselves the way they want to for the rest of their lives.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I think it's a very aspirational way to live, from that perspective, not from perfection or I got to get it right all the time or cross the T's and dot up the I's, but, just doing the best 1% better every day. I think it's a very empowering way to live. As we kind of like circle around here to the last couple questions, I know we've kind of come up on the hour here. Is there anything that, if you could tell yourself looking back over the past like 10 plus years, anything that would help you if you were just starting out in your journey, being plant-based vegan again?
I would not worry about figuring out how to cook perfect vegan meals and how to like be the best. I was a pretty good cook before. I would say I cook a lot less and a lot more simply now since I'm vegan. I think if I could do it over, I would have just skipped a lot of the complicated vegan cookbooks. I would have because it just was not going to fit in at my time of life with learning how to bake vegan muffins, and it just wasn't going to happen. And it didn't happen. But I was thinking I had to figure out how to do everything the way I had done before, only now vegan. And I would have
Right.
just really given myself a pass on that and just been a lot simpler right from the beginning. So if you were really interested in learning how to decide whether to use, flax eggs, or I tried and it took up a lot of my time, and it wasn't really what I wish I had done.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah. It's
Let
kind of,
somebody else make the vegan muffins.
yes. Yeah. We can pick them up on the way back home. Makes sense. Well, interesting question here is, if you had 60 seconds to change the life of somebody that you deeply care about, that you deeply love, using the power of plants, what would you say?
Oh, I know a few people who have done that, really, who really were struggling with some very serious health things. And I think I would put them in contact with those people. It is worth trying. There's usually no downside. I don't know of any physicians who will tell you not to try being more whole food, plant-based. So if I had 60 seconds, I would just say, try. Try.
Just give it a shot.
Give it a shot. There's really no downside.
Yeah. Yeah. I would be hard pressed to think of any downside from just eating more fruits and vegetables. Yeah. No, powerful statement. And you have a podcast that helps educate, empower other people, veg your best. I believe that's the correct title of it, using plants. I mean, tell us a little bit about this. How can people contact you for further support? And I'll make sure I add all the details to the show notes for everybody.
Thank you, Gabriel. That's super. And I have a podcast along the way, an episode along the way where I said we need more vegan podcasts, and I was like, I'll help anybody, and I'll be on anybody's vegan podcast anytime, anything I can do to share it. So because veganism isn't just food, it's all there. We need vegan politicians, and we need vegan teachers, and we need vegan art historians, and we need vegan, basic scientists. We need vegans in all aspects of the world, and I would love to see all of those areas. Vegan historians, I just would love to see more of that. I had one who was a vegan historian, a vegetarian historian. She's vegan, but she was the history of vegetarianism in America. Super interesting. So anyway, we need more vegans talking about what we do and how we do it, to show that you can do anything. It doesn't have to be your identity to be a vegan. You can be a physician. We have had a lot of vegan physicians. I'm sure you'll have tons of vegan physicians that will want to come on your podcast as you go through. My podcast is about just helping you normalize the idea of being a midlife or older person starting, restarting, or re-energizing your vegan or plant-based practice. And I think of it as a practice. I think of it as like, it's not a result. It's not something you get to. It's something that you just keep trying and learning from and committing and then recommitting and then, tweaking. It's just about being alive.
I love it. Yeah. It reminds me of Bruce Lee, when he talked a lot about the beginner and the difference between the master. And, the beginner has not even tried as many times as the master has failed. 10,000 reps, that's pretty well known. 10,000 hour rule. I mean, that's just the beginning. Like, you get to 10,000 reps, like, welcome. Welcome to that. Like, now let's get to 1,000,000 reps or 100,000 reps. But is there a best link or contact? Do you have a website? What would be the best place to
I
people
do.
to
My
find you?
website's actually called vegan@anyage.com, vegan@anyage.com. And my podcast is on all the podcasting platforms that I know of. It's Veg Your Best, and it's spelled VEDGE, like veg, like hedge, rhyming with head. I don't know if I would have done that again, but that was the decision 5 years ago. Veg Your Best, and so I'm just staying with it. But it's on all the podcasting platforms, and we've got a back catalog of over 280 now episodes. So
Uh,
there's something for everybody in there at this point.
there's an episode for everybody. We'll make sure we add those to the show details.
Thank you,
And is there?
Gabriel.
You're welcome, Michelle. It's been really a pleasure having you on here. Is there anything else that you'd like to add or share? Anything that would be helpful to close out the show with?
Well, I think don't be afraid to start, even though this can't be your job for the year, right? It's January when
Mm.
we're recording this. It'll probably go out later in the winter, but don't be afraid to start. I talk about, to many of people, I do a push-up. Sometimes I can do a bunch of push-ups. Sometimes I can only do one, but I just make sure that when I think of it, I go, oh, I'm going down for a push-up. I do squat. Don't wait until you've got time to do it all perfectly. Please just lean into anything that's important to you. It's important that you do it.
Makes sense. And you mentioned this at the beginning or in the middle of that interview. You said that don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. And
Absolutely.
I think it's a beautiful way to end the episode. Michelle, it's been a pleasure. Great to have you on here. Great to finally meet and spend some time together.
Thank you, Gabriel. I hope to hear lots more from you in 2026. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you.